everyone. Thanks for coming back from the break and joining us. So my name is Hayley. I'm a partner at First Round Capital, and we're a seed stage venture fund. I am very excited to be here today to present one of our most anticipated and informative annual projects called The State of Startups. So before we dive in, I want to give you a little bit of the history behind the state of startups. We first launched this report in 2015 with one goal, trying to figure out what it felt like to be the founder of a venture-backed company. We wanted to know this for two reasons. First, because at First Round, we really believe in understanding the founder experience. It was really important to us to know what it felt like to be fundraising as a founder, what it felt like to be building teams, what is keeping founders up at night, what do they think about the latest issues in the industry, and much, much more. The other reason we wanted this data is because it was important to founders. Very often, founders ask us, what are other people feeling? What are other founders doing? And gathering this data helps us be able to tell them that. So we've been doing this for 4 years now, and we're getting pretty good at it. We also have quite a lot of data. So over these 4 years, we have over 2,700 responses, which gives us close to 150,000 data points, which we think is probably the largest data set on the founder experience ever. And so today, you get a sneak peek. But with a caveat, because we publish this every year, there's often headlines in the tech press, and this actually won't be published until December, so I'm trusting all of you to keep this within the circle of trust. So no tweeting or taking photos of the slides. I'm also trusting the people on live stream to stay within the circle of trust as well. You're like, no way that's happening. Well, we'll see. So about the respondents, 17% female, 83% male. 75% of them fall between the ages of 30 and 50. Their companies are quite early stage, so 65% are Series A or earlier, which makes sense. There's more seed and Series A stage companies than there are late stage companies out there. And here's the breakdown geographically. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the stats for New York specifically, given we're in New York City and the audience here. 500 responses total, 21% from New York-based founders. And I give you these stats just to say that they're representative of the startup industry as a whole. So first, we're going to talk about fundraising. What do founders think about this process, and how is it going for them? 75% of the founders who responded have raised a venture round in the last 3 years. 62% of them pitched more than 5 venture capitalists in order to raise that round. For the founders in the audience, if that sounds like a low number, don't worry. 13% of them pitched more than 30 VCs. Sometimes it is a numbers game. In terms of the time it takes to raise a round, 42% answered that it takes more than 3 months. To me, this is not surprising. Of course, sometimes a fundraising round can happen quite quickly, whether it's a preemptive term sheet before you even start a process, or a process that happens fast. But we found at First Round that 3 months is about average, and we usually suggest to founders that they allow for 6 months of a process just to be safe, and that when you do raise for at least 18 months of runway so that you're not constantly fundraising. So every year that we've done this survey, we ask founders, who do they believe has the edge in a negotiation in a fundraise? Is it the founders or is it the investors? And there was a blip in 2017 when the founders said they thought investors had the edge. Founders have regained their power edge in 2018. And this is not surprising to me. While in 2017 there were some macro questions about the economy, given political events, it's very clear that the economy is doing fine so far. And there's also just a lot of money in the startup economy, whether it's more seed stage funds or scouts at the earliest stage, or whether it's billion-dollar funds investing at the later stage. That money makes it easier for founders to fundraise. But when you dig a layer deeper, the experience is not the same for all founders, unfortunately. We looked at the responses for women compared to men, and unfortunately, women are 25% less likely to say that they have the edge on investors. So when I thought about this, I thought, you know what, I don't know if this is perception or if this is reality, but frankly, it's one and the same. I was a founder myself. I raised over $70 million of venture capital. And I know that how confident you feel going into a fundraise process really matters in terms of the success of that process. And that brings us to one of our most hot button questions in our survey that we do every year. This time we asked about bias of investors. Where does it show up in the fundraise process? So we ranked them by, this is a choose all that apply question. There's some things that might not surprise you. So gender, 28% of people thought that might affect investors' perceptions. Race at 26%. But there's two answers on here that were surprising to us. First is the fact that 40% thought that there was no bias. I personally think that's a little bit naive. And then age was actually the highest ranked bias. So question for the room, who thinks that investors bias against young founders? Okay. Who thinks investors bias against older founders? All right, you got it. So the 40% of founders that thought there was bias against age in a fundraising process, we asked them, well, what age does that happen? Sorry to everyone who's 46 and older. In tech, that's when you're considered over the hill. And then we asked it more broadly, just, you know, if you're an employee at a startup or just in the tech industry generally, 88% of founders thought that there was age discrimination. But then we flipped it, and we asked what factors can influence a founder's decision to take money from an investor. And the answer that really stood out was politics. So this year, founders answered, 2 out of 3 of them said that VC's public stances on politics would influence their willingness to work with them. This is an even higher number than last year. And last year when we asked it, we asked it 2 different ways. Would you take money for them or would you put them on the board? And it's even more of an important thing for founders if that investor is going to join the board. All right, so that was fundraising. Let's talk about what founders are thinking and how they're feeling. They're feeling very ambitious. 23% of the people that we surveyed are absolutely certain they're building a $1 billion business. The laughs are probably appropriate because they're probably not all right. Only 7% of them say they're definitely not, but that means that a whole chunk of them think there's a chance. Maybe they'll be a $1 billion business. And we could contrast that with profitability. Only 13% are profitable, but it's just around the corner. There's a lot of optimism in terms of when that profitability will happen. So 65% say that they will be profitable within 3 years. In my experience, almost every financial plan of a startup looks this way. They're not profitable yet, but there's line of sight to profitability. But at least in our portfolio, you rarely achieve it, because usually investing in growth outweighs the need to generate a profit. So what's keeping them up at night? Maybe they're not profitable because they're hiring a bunch. That's the most popular answer. Hiring is keeping the founders up at night, and that's followed by revenue-generating concerns, acquiring customers, and just growing revenue in general. And then there's a big drop-off, the nice-to-haves. Team and life balance only at 8%, and then, unfortunately, diversity at 5%. So then we asked founders about themselves and what is important to them. So the way we asked this question is we asked them to rank from 1 to 6, what's most important to you. And what's clear from the answers is that these founders are very willing to delay financial gratification, so you see that ranked at number 5. I was pleasantly surprised to see that they recognize the importance of their physical and emotional health, with those being ranked number 1 and number 2. I personally had to learn this, that it's a marathon and not a sprint. My founder experience, I went through the too little sleep and too much pad thai era of my founder career, but I think this has become more top of mind for the industry, which is a good thing. So then we asked them about the team that they are leading, and we've done this all 4 years, and we're making steady progress. For the first time, it wasn't a majority that answered their team is mostly men. 49%, squeezing in just under 50. Yeah, we'll take it, progress. But unfortunately, it's still very skewed at the highest levels. So nearly 80% of boards are still mostly men. But hopefully, change is on the horizon. We're seeing a big change in the number of companies or the number of founders that are reporting that they have diversity plans implemented. So it's up 4x. When we first asked this in 2015, only 5% had diversity plans in place. But this year, 22%. So then let's zoom out. Let's talk a little bit about the industry and what founders are predicting. Again, they're optimistic. It's been a landmark year of IPOs, and founders think the IPO tear will continue. 78% of those asked this year think the pace will not let up. It'll be the same or better. And they've been increasingly optimistic every year. So we're still on bubble watch. It hasn't burst yet. And then we asked these founders where the next PayPal mafia is going to come from. So which company do they think will generate the next generation of founders? Uber was the clear leader on this. So 21% of founders said that Uber would be the next founder Wellspring. First Round is proud investors in Uber, so we like this answer. Slack and Stripe came in second and third. And then we also asked, of US-based private companies, where do they think value will most increase? And all of these companies are valued in the tens of billions, but founders think that there's more value still to come. And Stripe was the number 1 answer, currently valued around $20 billion. Despite Elon's PR tussles, SpaceX got the second spot, and there was a 3-way tie between Coinbase, Slack, and Airbnb for number 3. Thinking globally, we asked these founders, who are all US-based, given we didn't tell them these stats, maybe they didn't know them, but China boasts 9 out of the top 20 tech companies, but more than half of the founders asked think that the US will still be the center of tech in 10 years. Some aren't as nationalistic, so we had 39% think that China will become the epicenter. And then we had some respondents give more colorful answers, like, wherever I am is going to be the center. And then those that believe in decentralization, someone answered, there will be no center. So every year we asked, what's hot, what's not, what's overhyped, what's underhyped. The founders we asked were actually, even though they were dabbling in cryptocurrency, did not think that it was going to transform their industries. The industries that they're most excited about, that they think are underhyped, that have big value, were ag tech and life sciences. And I'm excited about this because I believe New York is actually really well positioned to be leaders in these industries, especially given schools like Cornell and the talent and the work that they're doing in these areas. So I want to leave you with this one, because I think it's a positive note to end on. But I also think it's indicative of the mood of the community. 95% of all founders believe that now is a good time to start a business. And if you do plan to start a business, I hope you're willing to talk to me and First Round Capital, or at least fill out our survey next year. Thank you.
Okay, let's do some questions for Hayley.
This is probably a new data point. I don't know when the survey was conducted. I have two questions. The first is like a newer one that's just struck Silicon Valley, and that's Saudi Arabia. I think Fred Wilson recently, wrote a blog about who are my investors. So, and I know Keith Rabois is very active about talking about some of that too, the amount of Saudi money in Silicon Valley. And there's been some sort of, you said politics are really important now. Mm-hmm. There's some pushback on, who are the top firms that are limited partners. And I don't know what your take on that is, if you have data points on that, but that's something.
Yeah, so we did this survey before the Khashoggi journalist murdered Saudi Arabia scandal. And we did ask founders what they thought about SoftBank and the Vision Funds, and if it was a good thing. Overwhelmingly, founders thought it was a good thing. I think it would be very interesting if we had been able to then measure again a few weeks after that scandal broke and the conversation has really been top of mind in Silicon Valley, to see if it's like, I just need money, I don't care where it comes from, or if that sentiment has changed. But I think the answer we saw about VCs' politics just shows that founders do care. They care who their investors are. I've noticed that more and more founders are asking who our investors are, so who our limited partners are in our funds.
And this is a second question. I don't want to take up too much time. But the seed and Series A round have increasingly become more amorphous over the years. Mm-hmm. Some of these seed rounds 10 years ago were like very large numbers. It's crazy to think that Cisco had a $300 million IPO. Like, it's really progressed. It's older than me, but from your data points too, what are you seeing in terms of how founders perceive Series A rounds, seed rounds, bridge rounds, and these new sort of ways of?
So we don't have data on that specifically in this survey, but I know from the time that I spend with founders that founders are confused themselves, especially at the early stages, about what the difference is between an angel round, a pre-seed round, a seed round, a big seed rounds, which used to be an A. Like the names of these rounds, I believe, and First Round believes, is less important than the maturity of your company, the type of help you need from the investors, and what you're raising the capital in order to do. So that's what I usually talk to founders about. I think what you put at the top of the term sheet in terms of what you call it is sort of an artificial construct. In fact, when the company I started, we raised our B round. Our company's called Birchbox. We called it the BB round because we thought, it sounded cuter.
Sorry, this is like my third question today, but
Sorry, it's the first one you're asking me.
All right. Do you know what percentage of founders believe that ethics are very important to their company?
I don't know. That wasn't part of the survey, unfortunately. And I think it's probably a hard one to survey because I think it's an easy thing to say you believe in, but maybe harder when you're faced with an ethical challenge. But we can definitely think of how to survey for that in the future.
Thanks for your talk today. This has been really interesting. Question that I have, kind of flipping it to you from an investor perspective, working with founders in sort of an arguably frothy market and a lot of money going around. What's your biggest concern with your founders, other than, say, like overpaying for a business? But like, what's your biggest concern? Are they going to be burning through cash too quickly? Are they going to be hiring too quickly? Where do you see the risk in a really frothy market like this?
Where do I see the risk for founders?
Yeah.
So we focus at the earliest stages at First Rounds. And because of the supply of money, we've actually seen the velocity of money increase. Rounds are being raised very quickly. And there's an interesting sort of like negative externality from that, which is founders, especially second-time founders, have had an idea for 2 days, and all of a sudden, millions of dollars are offered to them. Their ideas aren't being pressure tested by the market. They're also raising too much for there to be sort of like resource constraints to force them to figure things out quickly. So I get concerned for founders in that scenario. It's an incredibly important decision what company that you raise or what company that you start, and to have sort of this false early signal with investors just throwing money at you without really helping you decide whether there's a big sustainable company there, I think could be bad for the founder personally.
We had one question in the middle. I want to just go back to that ethics question for a second.
Okay.
So it really depends on how you define ethics, right? So if the student meant trustworthiness, transparency, well, any VC will say that's critically important, and I hope it's important for all the founders. So we'll leave it at that.
Those of us who are in the ecosystem sort of mentoring startup companies, I think, once you sort of get under the hood and spend a fair amount of time and sort of gain their trust, there's a non-trivial amount of just kind of therapy that's happening. Being a founder can be a very isolating experience. I'm curious what First Round and other investors are doing, what could be doing to address some of that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I agree with you totally that the founder experience can be very lonely. At First Rounds, we actually believe in community-based investing, so we don't view our relationship with a founder or portfolio company as being one-to-one. Instead, we view it as being many-to-many, and that it's our role as investors to connect those founders to each other, and actually everyone within those portfolio companies to each other, so that they can learn from best practices, but also mistakes and what's hard. And we do that in a few ways. We do that through in-person, real-life events, so moderated conversations over dinner, summits similar to this. But we also have a digital product that connects our portfolio company employees to each other, where you can ask questions, get answers anonymously or not anonymously. We also are very, very supportive of founders getting CEO coaching extremely early before they need it. I know that myself, when I was a founder, I was like, oh, that's expensive. I don't know if it's that important. But we've seen time and time again founders' ability to focus on personal development and having someone to talk to outside of the business that could help them, whether it's tactically or mentally, stay on the top of their game is incredibly important.
Do you have any statistics on what the success rate or failure rate is? As in, are the VCs willing to invest in a founder when he or she is not a subject matter expert?
You're going to have to repeat that last part. So you're asking for success metrics.
Or how likely a VC is to invest in a founder who's not a subject matter expert? Oh, investing in a founder who's not a subject matter expert in the business that they're starting. That's right.
I don't have data on it, but I can tell you my personal opinion, which is I think it's incredibly important for a founder to have a fit with the business that they're starting, for there to be a reason. But I don't think that reason has to be that they have deep expertise, whether that's professionally or personally. I know myself, I started a business in the beauty industry being an outsider, having never worked within it. And that enabled me to ask questions and do things differently than an industry insider would have. And I really love meeting founders who are thinking differently, looking from the outside in. But I always ask, what is it about this founder, whether it's their skill set, a personal experience, or their motivation, that makes them the right person to start this business in particular?
Yeah, well, first, thanks so much for the super sneak peek. It was very, very insightful.
No one tweeted, right? Hopefully not.
I didn't. So my question is, assuming the idea is great,
yes,
what are the biggest mistakes that you see startups are making?
Yeah, so the idea, I think, is almost the least important thing. And then there's execution. And then there's timing. But execution, I don't know, the biggest mistake, frankly, a lot of the times it comes down to relationship stuff, and particularly between co-founders. So my advice to anyone who's considering starting a company, especially with a co-founder, is to make sure you really vet that relationship, make sure that you've chosen the right roles, and also that you have the same, like an alignment of vision, alignment of work ethic. It's really it was eye-opening to me when I had joined in a venture capital role and I got to see the path of over 200 companies, just how often it came down to relationships and people stuff, even when it was a great idea that was well-timed and being executed well. Thank you.
Super. Thanks, Hayley.
Thanks.